Welcome to another episode of the Settlage Strength Podcast. My name is Josh Settlage, and it is my job to provide you with the best tools, tactics, and methods to help you lift heavy, roll hard, and ultimately feel and perform your best, not just in the gym, not just on the mat, but in everyday life. In this episode, we're going to be going over how to decrease your risk of injury on the mat and, for the most part, in the gym. So, how can you get injured less? Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, really any kind of grappling sport, it's a combat sport. Injuries are going to happen because there's nothing that you can do to 100% prevent injury from happening in jiu-jitsu or wrestling outside of just not wrestling and not doing jiu-jitsu, which that's never fun. So it's important that before we start this conversation, you understand that injuries will happen. However, there's a lot of things that you can do to drastically decrease your overall risk of injury. The first thing that you can do is really to just get stronger. I've been saying this for years. No one ever got injured because they were too strong. I've also been saying for years that no one ever lost a match or lost in training because they were too strong. Now, when I say that, sometimes I get comments on Instagram or YouTube where people disagree with that. They say, oh, you can definitely be too strong where you injure yourself. And that just logically makes zero sense. The only reason why someone gets injured is because they're not strong enough to absorb or receive the forces that are being applied to them. So if you think about if someone just decided not to tap in an arm bar and their elbow keeps getting into that extended position and it pops, it's not because they were too strong. It's because they weren't strong enough. They weren't strong enough to handle the forces of being forced into that fully hyperextended position. Same thing with if you pull a muscle or if you tear a muscle. It's not because you physically were too strong. It's because you weren't strong enough. You weren't strong enough to handle the forces being applied onto those muscles, and that's typically what caused the injury. So all that to say, if you want to be able to decrease the risk of injury on the mat, getting stronger is the best place to start. That's why strength training I think at this point, most grappling athletes kind of all understand that strength training is important. Before, which this makes no freaking sense to me, back in the day, people used to think that, getting stronger is going to, ruin your technique in jiu-jitsu. Lifting weights in the gym is going to make you slow. It's going to make you stiff and all this stuff. And none of those things are true. None of those things logically make any sense. And obviously, as time has gone on, people have understood, if you are stronger, you perform better as an athlete. Yes, if you are stronger, you're more durable. Yes, as you get stronger, you're less likely to get injured. So people now kind of have a better understanding that, you should be doing some form of strength training, but I still think that a severely underrated aspect of strength training and why it's so beneficial for grappling athletes is the way it helps you become more durable and less likely to get injured. You don't need to be strong in the sense that you can squat 1,000 pounds or deadlift 1,000 pounds, though it'd be really cool if you could do that. You want to think about getting stronger and just making your body more resilient and more durable and making your body better prepared for the stressors of jiu-jitsu. And hyperfixating on any one particular exercise like the squat, bench, or deadlift may not be the best way to build strength that properly prepares you to handle the stressors that you're going to experience on the mat. So when it comes to getting stronger, over the course of doing this podcast for the last few episodes, I've talked a lot about what exercises are best to help you get stronger, how to balance lifting heavy and rolling hard and all that stuff. So we're not going to go too much into how to get stronger for jiu-jitsu. We have a ton of episodes and YouTube videos, a bunch of resources inside the Strength Matrix that can help you get started in becoming brutally strong as a grappling athlete. But it's important to understand that if you want to decrease your risk of injury as a grappling athlete, it starts with getting stronger. Now, the next thing I would say that contributes to drastically decreasing your risk of injury is just tapping early and tapping often. You can kind of almost say don't train like a dingus. If your elbow is getting fully extended and you can't escape, you might as well just tap. It's over. You're not going to get much benefit from letting your elbow go all the way past its normal range of motion and really straining and putting a lot of wear and tear on those tissues. For myself, I would say the things that have caused the most injuries for me have been just really not knowing when the gig was up. It's like, look, I can't escape this choke. I can't escape this submission. I don't feel like I'm going to pass out. I don't feel like something is going to snap right away. Even though I can't escape, I'm going to wait, try to take it right up to the edge, and then I'll tap. I used to do that all the time when I was a white belt, when I was a blue belt, and I'd say I did it a lot less as a purple belt, but for sure as a white belt and a blue belt, I would not tap early and I would not tap often enough, and that led to, unfortunately, like a bunch of minor injuries and knickknacks that could have easily been avoided or could have easily been prevented. And if whether you're new to jiu-jitsu, whether you're an old head in jiu-jitsu, you've been doing it for a while, it's important to know that, just tap early, tap often. Another thing that I would say is that nobody cares if you get tapped in training. Seriously, no one cares. No one's even thinking about it except you. And I made a post about this in January. So I started training jiu-jitsu January 2nd, 2017. And so every January 2nd, I kind of reflect back and think about the most important lessons or things that I've learned over my time doing jiu-jitsu. So this year, it's been 8 years of doing jiu-jitsu. And one of the things that I've learned, especially this last year, was nobody cares if you get tapped in training. No one's thinking about it. No one notices. No one really cares that much. You're the only one who gets upset that you get tapped in training. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that nobody cares who you tap in training. Most people aren't thinking about it. They might see something like, oh my gosh, like that guy tapped that guy. That's kind of cool. And within 24 hours, like, boop, they just forget about it. No one's keeping track of any of that stuff. It doesn't really matter, especially in training. And because I found those things to be true, that's at least helped me just be way more comfortable with tapping early and tapping often. If someone, even if they're technically a quote unquote lower belt, gets my heel and they put me in a heel hook, I'm not going to try to do some crazy late stage escape if I feel like I can't move and my hip is locked up, my knees, I feel the torque on my knee, my toes are trapped into the armpit. It's like, look, I would rather just tap, start the roll over, and keep going again. I don't want to wait and risk something bad happening or risk an injury happening because I really want to make sure I don't get tapped by this guy. That's at least how I look at it. And I can confidently say that since I've adopted that mindset over the last couple of years, my rate of injury has drastically decreased. The next thing that you can do when it comes to decreasing the risk of injury is to train hard and recover harder. This is a big one. You don't make progress off of the things that you do in the gym or on the mat. You only make progress off of what you do and can recover from. And that can be really tough to recognize sometimes because we love training. If you're listening to this podcast, I already know you love to lift heavy, you love to roll hard. What you probably don't love is doing like extra mobility work, getting extra sleep, staying on top of your nutrition and all that stuff. Like those things have so much benefit, but it's not like the fun stuff. The fun stuff is going to the gym, smashing some weights, going to jiu-jitsu or wrestling and rolling hard. That's the fun stuff. Yet the fun stuff does come at a little bit, it does have a cost associated with it. And we have to make sure that we're paying back that cost. Because if we keep, you almost think like if you have a debit card, you keep swiping that debit card, but you don't put funds back in it or you don't, cash those paychecks, eventually you're going to run out and eventually your account's going to go negative, and that's a bad thing. And recovery kind of works the same way. You don't make progress off of what you do. You make progress off of what you do and can still recover from. And when you are under recovered, well, some people say that they're like, oh, I'm overtrained. That's why I keep getting injured. And I hardly have ever met anybody who is legitimately overtrained. Most of the time when I talk to athletes that are dealing with chronic injuries or they're constantly banged up, it's not because they're overtrained, it's because they're under recovered. And those are kind of two different things. Under recovered to me just means like, hey, you're doing all of this training, but from day to day and week to week, you're not going through the necessary practices to make sure that your body's recovering from all the work that you're doing. You're going to jiu-jitsu 6 days a week, you're trying to maintain 4 workouts a week, yet your sleep is abysmal, you're hardly sleeping. Your nutrition is all over the place. Some days you're eating plenty of food, consuming plenty of protein to help recover from Monday's workout, but then on Tuesday, the only thing you ate was a bunch of KFC and some energy drinks, and that's it. And then you try to do the, lift heavy, roll hard on Tuesday, and then you try to do that again on Wednesday, and it's all over the place. So a lot of times, if you find that, at least in my experience and the athletes I've worked with, if you find that you're kind of chronically injured or chronically banged up, the first thing you should look at is try to get stronger. The next thing you should also look at is what are your recovery habits like? Are you getting at least 7 hours of sleep every single night? Are you consuming enough food and calories, not just to fuel your training sessions in the gym and on the mat, but are you also providing your body with the proper nutrients to help you with the recovery process? And are you also structuring your training week the right way? The way I look at recovery is that there were 3 major components to optimizing your recovery. The first one is sleep, the second one is nutrition, and the third one is your training schedule. I see oftentimes athletes get injured because they structure their training week improperly, so to speak. So they try to put like all these crazy high intensity training sessions back to back to back, where their risk of injury continues to go up as they continue to accumulate a lot of fatigue and still try to maintain a really high intensity later in the week. So for example, like say Monday you go to jiu-jitsu and like, okay, that's going to be my most intense. I'm rolling hard, like all sparring rounds, going hard in the paint. That's awesome. You're going to be a little fatigued after that training session. So then you try to do it again on Tuesday, everyday pohada. Do it again on Tuesday, and say you get through it on Tuesday. On Wednesday, you've had 2 high-intensity training sessions, and on Wednesday, you're kind of going into that training session a little bit compromised, carrying a lot of fatigue from the last 2 days. If you, try to go hard in the paint again and roll the dice, that's not to say that you will get injured or it's guaranteed that you're going to get injured, but your risk of injury does go up. And that's why I encourage athletes to try to separate their highest intensity or the hardest training sessions by at least 48 to 72 hours to help give their body a little bit more time to recover, so that way you can go into the next hard training session a little bit better prepared for that hard training session. The way I typically structure my training weeks is, like I said, I try to separate high stimulus training days or high intensity training days, like the days where I'm doing my biggest lifts, the days where I'm going lifting heavy in the gym, and the days where I'm rolling really hard. I try to separate those days by 48 to 72 hours. So today I went to the gym, did some dynamic effort lower training, did some speed deadlifts, some box jumps, was doing some hip exercises, also did some accessories that I went pretty hard on for my shoulders, biceps, triceps. I had a great workout today. Tonight, I know I'm rolling hard. I know that it's like some no-gi training. I know that some of my best training partners are going to be there, and we're rolling hard. So today is that high stimulus, high intensity training day. What does that mean for tomorrow? Well, tomorrow I'm going to dial it. I'm going to bring down the intensity quite a bit. I'm still going to train, still going to go to the gym tomorrow. Probably will still go to jiu-jitsu, but I'm intentionally going to take things a little bit easier because I don't want to continue drawing from the well and continue to induce all that fatigue. So that way I can recover a little bit more between today, and I can recover a little bit more tomorrow, and then I'm ready for like another high stimulus, high intensity training day on Saturday. Today's Thursday. So that's typically how I structure the training week to kind of help with that recovery, which if you're able to recover better between all of your training sessions, you're also able to overall decrease your risk of injury. Now, the next thing, and this one's kind of a tough one to do because it takes time. The next thing you can do to decrease the risk of injury is to understand how your body moves. This takes a while to get a good grasp of, because if unless you have been doing grappling sports your whole life, or maybe you've been an athlete your whole life, a lot of times people come into jiu-jitsu and they don't fully understand how their body moves, or they're not necessarily aware of the different positions that their body can get into safely, and kind of where the limit is on where things are safe versus where things go beyond that point and you're at a much greater risk of injury. And that's how I see a lot of people in jiu-jitsu get injured, especially with their knees. I've seen so many people injure their knees because they're not aware of how their hips and their knees work together, and how your knees can kind of get into all these funky positions as long as you have good hip mobility. But if you have poor hip mobility, your knees are definitely at a much greater risk of getting injured. And I'll use myself as an example. I'm very familiar with how my body moves. I'm very familiar with the different ranges of motion that I can get into safely. And there have been plenty of times where I've gotten into a scramble, or maybe the mats are slippery and someone slips and they kind of land on my legs in a weird way. But I've been able to keep myself safe for the most part because I'm aware of how my body moves. I know when my body needs to be relaxed to kind of like just fall like a sack of potatoes in the right position. So that way I'm not trying to, stop someone's falling body weight to kind of just fall with them. Also know when I need to maintain stiffness to kind of hold a certain position to protect myself. But I still get injured sometimes. And the most recent serious injury that I had was a couple years ago. I tore my LCL. I was training with a buddy of mine, and I put him in a calf slicer. I was the one doing the submission, and I still blew my knee apart, which is a huge bummer and very ironic. And the reason why that happened was because I was not really paying attention to the full limit of my knee range of motion and the pressures that were being put on my knee. Obviously, when you're drilling the technique and you're doing it against a passive, non-resisting opponent, things feel a lot differently compared to when you are doing it against an active, fully resisting opponent. And so I put my training partner in this calf slicer position. I lock it up. It was getting pretty tight. I could feel the pressure on the outside of my knee on my LCL. And then this is like the calf slicer. I think it's in the gi, they call it the matrix guard. And this was a no-gi round, so I don't even remember how I was getting into this position. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I grab his hips and I pull him on top of me to see if I can like put more of a bend in his knee. And all of his body weight kind of came down, which is fine. I was pulling him on top of me, but I was also really just, turning my knee out, or externally rotating my hip way more than what my knee could handle. And all that force went onto my right knee, and I heard a huge crack. It was almost like someone swung and hit a baseball with a baseball bat. It sounded really loud. And I felt the pop immediately, and I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck happened? And anyway, long story short, I tore my LCL. And the main reason why that happened was, even though I've been doing tons of strength training, tons of mobility training, even though I am, for the most part, very aware of how my body moves and how to keep myself safe, I didn't understand that position very well. I didn't understand kind of the limits of my body in that position, and that ultimately resulted in an injury. And I've seen that happen a lot, not just with myself, but with other athletes that don't necessarily understand, okay, what are the limits of their shoulder rotation? What are the limits of their hip rotation? What are the limits of how their neck moves, or how their feet and ankle move in relation to their knee position, their hips, and all that stuff? So if you want to further help decrease your risk of injury, just really focusing on understanding a little bit more on how your body moves can be a great place to start. Now, how you can learn that really just comes from more training and being much more intentional about trying to have not just mind-muscle connection, but I guess it sounds weird to say mind-body connection. But part of why I think bodybuilding is so beneficial for grapplers is because you do improve your own mind-muscle connection. You can feel certain muscles moving. You know what it's like to, when you're doing a rowing exercise, you know what it's like to do a row and feel your lats squeezing and pulling backwards versus feeling all the tension in your bicep. And so that definitely relates to muscles, but you also want to kind of take that same intentionality and take that same focus when you're doing other exercises, or even when you're drilling, or even when you're doing other things on the mat. Like, okay, I mean, the people watching the video can see this, but how do things change? This looks kind of goofy. How do things feel when I go internal hip rotation versus external hip rotation? How does that feel on my hips? How does that feel on my knees? If I'm doing, internal hip rotation where I'm laying on my back, how does that feel compared to if I'm doing it and getting kind of like this internal hip rotation while I'm standing? There's all these different things that you can learn about your own body and how it moves, which can then help you just be a little bit safer when you're doing live training on the mat. And it can even help you be a little bit safer in the gym too. Just knowing, like, hey, when I do dumbbell bench press, I know that things feel really good and really strong when I keep my elbows close. As my elbows get farther and farther away from my body, I feel more of the pressure onto my shoulder, which doesn't feel great. And if it doesn't feel great, then you should probably put yourself in a position that feels a lot better. All that being said, understand how your body moves, and that can drastically help decrease your overall risk of injury. The next thing you can do to decrease the risk of injury on the mat is to pick safe training partners. This one is, I don't want to say, now that I'm going through the list, I don't want to say that any one of these is most important, because if you are working on getting stronger, but you still train like a dingus and don't tap early, you're probably going to get injured. If you tap early, tap often, but you still train with people who are unsafe training partners, you're probably still going to get injured. If you know everything and can always put yourself in the perfect position and understand how your body moves, but you're still weak, you're probably going to get injured. So now that I think about it, none of these are drastically more important than the others, but I will say that I do want to kind of really highlight this point right here, which is pick safe training partners. I know that's not always doable. Sometimes if you get paired up with someone at a seminar, or maybe you're training with somebody, it's like, look, you this is the card you drew. You're going to be paired up with this guy. Like, that's what happens. But as the best you can, try to keep like a list in your head of who the most safe training partners are. I know for myself that there are certain people that I try to train with as least as possible, because every time I train with them, I tweak something, I get injured, or they take risks that I am not willing to take. For me personally, if I train with anybody that jumps guard or does flying scissor takedowns or flying submissions, like, catch you later, bro. I ain't training with you. Like, I am not risking that. There are some people that I do train with that I trust enough that even though they don't do that regularly, if they said, like, hey, can I practice this? Hey, like, I want to try this scissor takedown. I want to try this jumping triangle, whatever. I trust them enough to know, like, okay, we're going to take this kind of slow. We're going to do it as safe as possible. But if someone just out of the blue at a regular live roll just does like a flying scissor takedown, like, that's it. Like, we're done. I'm not training with you anymore. And I know that can sometimes maybe make things a little bit awkward, or maybe make things a little bit confrontational. But for me, it's way more worth it for me to have things be awkward with someone than to have my knee blown out because that guy trains like a spaz and is a dingus. I would much rather like have a slightly confrontational conversation, which I don't like confrontational conversations anyways, but I would much rather have like a slightly confrontational conversation. Just say, like, I'm not doing that. Like, we're gonna chill. I'm not rolling the rest of this round. I would much rather have that happen than a serious injury happen. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times people feel like they can't advocate for themselves at jiu-jitsu, or they can't speak freely about what they are willing to tolerate from a training partner. And I think sometimes they feel pressured to, like, oh, this guy asked to roll with me, I have to say yes. This guy always rolls like an absolute maniac. He's always doing crazy stuff. The last time I rolled with him, I tweaked my shoulder and I was out for 2 weeks. Like, you can totally decline rolls. You don't have to roll with anybody. You can always say no. I think it's dumb when certain schools have rules that if an upper belt asks you to roll, you have to say yes. That's stupid. That's just so dumb. I think obviously there's like a fine line. Like you don't want to be a pansy and say like, "Oh, I'm tired. I'm not going to roll." Like if you're just tired, yeah, go roll. Go work on your conditioning. Go, build up that gas tank. But if someone asks you to roll that you find is like they're not that safe of a training partner, the risk of injury severely goes up training with those people, then yeah, you can totally just decline. And it's also good to, as you gain more experience and as you get to know your training partners a little bit more, it's good to know and kind of have a list of the people that you know you can get the greatest training stimulus out of, or the greatest training session out of, and really raise up the intensity while still being very, very safe. I know for me, there are a few people that I have trained. I trained really, really hard with those guys for years, and I've never been injured rolling with them. They have excellent control. They're not going to do anything crazy that would put either of us at risk. They have good spatial awareness to know like they're not going to try to run a blast double on me right next to another group where I might trip over somebody. Or they also know like if the mats are getting really sweaty and slippery, they're not going to try to do some crazy scissor takedown or something like that. And it takes time to build trust with your training partners. And when you're able to build trust with your training partners and you're able to kind of raise the bar of intensity while also respecting your training partner, not doing anything crazy, not doing anything that puts either of you at risk, those are really special training partners to have. And those are great people to get the majority of your training with. Now, the other thing with picking safe training partners, obviously you don't want to train with someone who would do something risky or put your physical safety at risk, but it's also important to pick safe training partners where you know that you're not going to bang yourself up too much, or like if you like, for example, when I was coming back from my knee injury, I had to be really deliberate with who I trained with, not because I was afraid that they were going to injure me, but because I knew that like I just could not roll. I would get too excited rolling with them, and I might be more of a risk to myself than they were going to be at a risk to me. And so maybe that's less about picking safe trading partners, and maybe we'll add like a little sub line on this list that you also need to be safe to yourself and take things really, really slow. If you're injured or if you have been injured and you're coming back to jiu-jitsu after a long period of time, take things way slower than you think that you need to. I've seen it's so sad when like your training partner gets, or one of your training partners gets injured. They're out for a month or 2 months or whatever, and they come back and you're super excited to see them. And you're like, "What's up, dog? It's great to see you. Like, how's that shoulder feeling? How's your neck feeling or whatever?" And they say like, "Man, it's actually feeling really good. Like, this is my first day back, and I'm really excited to be here, and like things are feeling good." And they go way too hard the first day back and they injure themselves again. That is the worst. I've seen it happen so many times, and I wish I could just tell those people when they're coming back from an injury and say like, "All right, I'm going to stop you right here. Like, you need to take at least 2 more weeks and then come back. Like, take things twice as slow as you think you need to really make sure you're physically prepared to get back on the mat. And even when you do get back on the mat, still take things twice as slow before you start just diving into just full clip training again." And the last thing I'll say on this is that injuries are going to happen. These are combat sports that are literally designed to learn, to teach you the skills to take someone's limb and bend it in the complete opposite direction, or to twist it in the complete opposite direction. Injuries are going to happen. And if you go into jujitsu or you go into wrestling with the expectation that you're never going to get injured, or you're going to avoid injuries completely, you have another thing coming to you. I naively thought I could avoid most injuries in jiu-jitsu because I'd come from wrestling and I made a lot of mistakes in wrestling where I'd gotten injured, and I thought like, okay, now that I'm older, now that I'm stronger and I'm a better athlete, I can go into jiu-jitsu and I'm not going to get too banged up. Like, I'll be okay. I know what I'm doing. And sure enough, I still got injured, and it absolutely sucked. And I got injured because I made mistakes on a lot of these things. I made mistakes where I didn't tap early, didn't tap often. I got my neck just so jacked up where the chronic neck pain was absolutely unbearable. I would roll with unsafe training partners. Like, I did not care who I rolled with. I was like, I don't care if this guy is an absolute maniac and a giant spaz. I'll roll with him anyway. And sure enough, I got rolled over my neck, and that started a whole cascade of issues in my neck where I had bulging discs all over the place. I had nerve damage on both sides of my arms, and it took, I think, after that particular neck injury, rolling with that guy, it took me 2 years to get back to the same level of strength that I was at before the neck injury happened. That was a rough one. But it's because leading up to that, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, I still wasn't doing all the stuff that I was supposed to be doing. I wasn't tapping early. I wasn't tapping often. I was training hard, but I was not recovering harder. I kind of understood how my body moved, but I wasn't respecting the fact that, like, hey, it's not good for your neck to just get cranked on like that all the time, even if it's like a crank and not fully a choke. I was not picking safe training partners, and I thought I was invincible. Turns out I wasn't. I'm not a vulture mite or anything, and my neck really got banged up. And that was a very unfortunate lesson to learn, which I thought I had learned. And then I ended up tearing my LCL 2 years after that. The neck injury happened in 2019, and it took me until about 2021 to, really feel like I got all my upper body strength left, or got all my upper body strength back because of the nerve damage in my arms. And then, what's crazy is when I look at the timeline, the neck injury, like the straw that broke the camel's back with a neck injury, happened in September or October of 2019. And I kind of did all this different rehab stuff, had a lot of ups and downs and all that. Then by 2022, I was, still training jujitsu all through that time. Just had to make some changes to my training and stuff like that. But at the end of 2021, I was going through this huge strength phase, and my upper body strength was unreal. I was like, man, like, I'm feeling good. I'm actually like hitting lifetime PRs, not like quote unquote post injury PRs, but like PRs, like lifting weights that have been the heaviest that I've lifted in my entire life. I hit a PR on my floor press and dumbbell bench press and Z press, which, because of my neck injury, those three exercises had always been really difficult. No, I kid you not, a week, or maybe it was like 10 days after hitting all those PRs, I tear my LCL, which absolutely sucked. But that's just part of the game. That's just part of doing combat sports. Injuries are going to happen. There's nothing you can do to 100% prevent injuries in jiu-jitsu or wrestling outside of just choosing not to wrestle and not to jiu-jitsu, which is never fun. But even though that is the reality, I do encourage you that there are so many things that you can do to drastically decrease your risk of injury. And I can thankfully say that since that injury in 2021, where I tore my LCL, or 2022, I'm getting the years mixed up. I think it was end of 2022 that all that stuff happened. I can confidently say since then, I haven't really had that many major injuries since. I've been able to be relatively safe. I have some amazing training partners. I am very particular with who I train with. If something looks sketchy, or if a new guy comes in that looks sketchy, it's like, I'm going to take things super slow, and I'm not trying to get injured or anything like that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for being a supporter of the Settlage Strength podcast. I've been recording podcast episodes and putting them on wax for the last 3 days straight, and it's been a ton of fun. I'm super excited for the future of the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, or you see one of the clips on Instagram, please comment below what you guys want to see in the podcast next. This podcast really is a huge passion project for me. One of my biggest passions in life is learning, and then being able to share the things that I learned with other people, the things that I found valuable and helpful for me. I want to be able to pass those along to other grappling athletes and really help as many people as possible lift heavy and roll hard. I'm a firm believer that lifting heavy and rolling hard is the ultimate form of personal development. And I think the way I look at it is the the voluntary actions that we take to really lock in and grind through some heavy ass weights in the gym, or the mental fortitude that we build by rolling hard and picking tough training partners at jiu-jitsu, those things that are voluntary and expected challenges and adversity that we're choosing to face, those things prepare us in so many different ways for the unexpected adversity, for the unexpected challenges that come in everyday life. So if you guys are enjoying this podcast and have specific things that you want to see in the future, drop them in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Lift heavy, roll hard. Catch y'all later. Peace.